Welcome, everyone. Beverly, I don't know have we met? We have. You're muted, but that's okay.
We both know Lou Ormond.
Lou Ormond?
Yeah, we both know him.
Oh my goodness.
Right?
Well, you're telling me we do. He's been on my mind just today.
Oh, wow.
Very strange.
We should talk later. I was just thinking of Lou today, just recently, just before this meeting started. There's a wow. Beverly is referencing one of the most wonderful people in my life who passed away some years ago, about 5 years ago. I think a lot of people felt that way about him.
He was very lovable.
And very brilliant.
Very kind.
Huh?
Very kind.
All of that.
All of the above.
Well, let's get started tonight. Nice to see everybody. Charles, Philip, Tim, Amelia, Graham, Karen, Valerie, Tripp, Joe, and Mary. Mary, we can barely see you, but I guess that's okay. So let's start with a bow. Make it traditional and Buddhist. I'm going to try and keep these papers, my notes, talk notes, away from the microphone on this computer. One of the hazards of Zoom. So we're working our way through a syllabus of readings. Called The Path of Meditation. And tonight the topic, we're on number 2 in this syllabus. We're in semester 2, class number 2, and it's called The Structure of Ego. For those of you who are a part of the psychological establishment in any form, this might be somewhat interesting. And this is one of the very fundamental teachings of Buddhism. Although the presentation of it given by Trungpa Rinpoche is much more sophisticated than you might find coming from other teachers. There are different levels of sophistication in Buddhism, and these are described, especially in the Tibetan version of Buddhism, where there are what they call vehicles, graded from beginning to advanced. And this is what you might say is a teaching of the first early beginning vehicles. But the way in which it's given is from the perspective of the most advanced, which is the way Trungpa Rinpoche always taught. He always gave us the most fundamental teachings, if he was giving them fundamental ones, from an extraordinarily advanced perspective. And really this is from a great, what I would call a great perfection perspective, which is the last and the 9th of the 9 vehicles, according to the Nyingma sect of Tibetan Buddhism. Each sect has its own schema. The Kagyus have, we see 1, 2, 3, 6, 7 vehicles. And the Kagyas and the Sakyas go back and forth. I mean the Gelugpas and the Sakyas. In any event, this is about how the fundamental error starts. Now, when the Buddha first achieved enlightenment, he didn't think that he could communicate what he had seen. He thought it was beyond words. And he spent some time traveling wandering as a mendicant. And then he ran into 4 of his fellow practitioners, people who had practiced with him before his enlightenment. And he had practiced renunciation of different kinds with them, austerities. He half starved himself to death and other physical austerities. And when they first saw him, they thought that he had fallen off the path, because here he was looking not starved, healthy. And then they thought that something was unusual about him. And they asked him to speak. This took place just outside what is now called Varanasi, the city of Varanasi, which bills itself, true or not, as the oldest living city in the world, meaning it's been a city for 4,000 years. That much is certainly true. And just outside of Varanasi, in an area called Sarnath, is a grove, a forest, and that's where the Buddha met these 4 fellow practitioners, and he gave his talk on the 4 Noble Truths. The first of the 4 Noble Truths is the truth of suffering. And it very much relates to this talk tonight, which is about the structure of ego, because ego is the fundamental mechanism for suffering. Ego is the sense of personal existence, I. In modern psychology, we talk about having a healthy ego, but that's a different sort of structure. What happened was that actually what the Buddha was talking about was not, he didn't use the word ego. I mean, after all, that's a Latin term. He used presumably the Sanskrit word Atman, which is often translated as soul or self. And it comes from the Hindu tradition, in which there is the ultimate reality is conceived of as being Brahman. And each one of us has a little piece of that reality, which is our soul, as it were. And that soul transmigrates from one body to the next. The bodies die and the soul finds a new body. The soul itself is immutable, never-ending, eternal. And eventually, the soul goes through its spiritual journey, reunites with the Brahman, and becomes one with it. What the Buddha said was, there is no soul. It's a myth. There is no individual sense of I. It's a myth. It's a fiction. It's a pernicious fiction. And that this sense of I, which we carry around with us, and which we think is real and and eternal and unchanging, the idea of a soul, is not at all. There is no such thing. Everything, absolutely, changes, according to Buddhist doctrine. Everything utterly is impermanent. Nonetheless, there is this sense of I. Now, he talks about in this first reading, how many people have done these readings? Anybody? Do I need to reference them? A few, okay. I want to say this, that if you would like the readings, put your email address in chat. And if you don't know how to do that, we can talk about it at the end of the talk. And I will then send you the readings if I find your email address in chat. Chat is a function at the bottom of your screen. If you're on a computer, it's a little window like a talking bubble, and it says chat. And in there you can go and send me your email. So he's talking about how in our experience, we have a basic sense of me-ness that we carry around, and it's somewhat heavy. It's unhappy. It's a sense of constantly being challenged, our very existence, as though our life were under constant threat, which it is, of death. And this gives us a feeling of anxiety, which we carry with us in small or in large through the days of our lives. This is what is meant by the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. He's referring to this. In this reading, he calls it the feeling of basic fucked upness. It's like you don't quite know what's up, you know? You don't know which end is up. You don't know, who am I? Where is this going? What's it all about, you know? How do I handle this? And there's this sense of lost ground, of not knowing quite how to deal and where you are, and constantly searching for a right orientation, for a method, for something that's going to put you on an even keel and give you the answer, if there is such a thing. It's that feeling of anxiety, that basic anxiety. That's what he means by this basic fucked upness that we carry around with us. The second aspect of ego is the more developed aspect, and we're going to come to how we get there, which is the thoughts and emotions that we carry around, which are expressions. In a way, they're driven by that fundamental anxiety. All kinds of thoughts and emotions. And these thoughts and emotions get us involved in I-other relationships of all kinds. He says something interesting about that. Hatred, lust, envy, pride, and so on. There are thought eruptions that occur occasionally, heavier instances of the thinking process. The first aspect, this basic feeling of sort of anxiety and heaviness, worry about this me, which is almost inchoate. It's like you haven't expressed it yet. It's like we carry it around with us all the time. Has no verbal expression, and then we give it expression in our emotions and our thoughts. He says the second aspect, the emotions and the thoughts, is highly occupied, extremely active, produces dreams and memories, and stores those in an Akashic record. That in quotes, that's not his term, not a Buddhist term. And what this really is there, in Buddhist psychology, they talk about there being 8 consciousnesses. 6 of them have to do with the 6 knowables, which are objects of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mental objects. Those are the first 6 consciousnesses. The 7th consciousness is the sense of I, and these aren't discrete things that actually exist. They're different modalities of our confusion, of our neurosis, you might say. And then the 8th is, you might say, that's called the Storehouse Consciousness, Kunji in Tibetan, Alaya in Sanskrit. And it's the name for the fact that the things that happen to us get stored in memory. So no one is thinking about their childhood right now, but until I mention it. And then some vague memories of childhood might appear. Or you're not thinking about your mother until I mention her, and then she pops up. She's stored in your alaya, the memory of her, and all the little memories that you have of her. And we carry this around with us all the time. He says the second emotional faculty is confrontational and communication. So how do we get into this particular condition? There is a schema that you can contemplate. I've been contemplating it for 50 years. It's called the 5 heaps, or in Sanskrit, the 5 skandhas. And they are, the first is form, the second is feeling, the third is, however you want to call it, concept or impulse. The fourth is, you could call it concept, it's really intellection. And the fifth is the full-blown emotional state of confusion, which in the 5 skandhas is given the name consciousness, the consciousness of ego. The basic idea, the first one, form, I'll just sort of paint this in broad strokes, okay? Reality is here with us all the time. It's this space that we dwell in, that we inhabit, in which the 6 knowables, again, objects of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mind, mental events, are all arising and passing away in the moment without any endurance. The idea that these things endure over time is just that, an idea, a story we tell ourselves from moment to moment. But what we experience moment to moment as you turn your head is a kaleidoscope of different visual objects. These words, as they come out of my mouth and you hear them, are a constant, it's like a waterfall. You know, it's not the same from 1 second, 1 instant to the next. As soon as a word is born, it's already dying. And this is the same for all the knowables, all the 6 knowables. They all arise and pass away in the instant. They don't endure in this present moment for even a split second. As they are arising, they're passing. And this really is the ground of our being, this open space with these constant appearances, sounds, smells, tastes, the knowables. They're called in Tibetan nangwa, vikalpa in Sanskrit. And what it means is appearances. That's the way it's usually translated into English. And there's a famous mantra that's sometimes chanted in different ceremonies. It goes like this: things exist, things appear, things appear, and yet they do not exist. They do not exist, and yet they appear. They're talking about these 6 knowables. They don't have any true existence, and yet they appear. And there's a whole description of how this happens called the 3 bodies of the Buddha, which we can go into at another time. It's quite gorgeous, elegant, sophisticated presentation of how these things happen and what each aspect of the appearing means, because there's a different aspect to it. These 3 bodies of the Buddha. Nonetheless, so here we are, here we aren't. There's just this empty space with all these things arising and passing away, and there's no one who's named it yet. No one who's said that's this and this is that, you know, and anything like that. There's just this flashing. This happens all the time. This is part of what we are. But suddenly, in the midst of all this, there is a concretization. It's as though you've got this complete matrix of space, color, sound, smell, taste, touch, moment to moment. And then in the middle of this, there's a separation out of figure and ground. And something, some aspect of that, of these 6 knowables becomes prominent. And everything else is still there, but it fades away into the ground. You've got the figure and the ground. It's what's important and what's less important. And I always remember back in the 60s, wandering around in Greenwich Village and seeing a poster up on a wall. And I looked at it, it was just this mash of colors. I couldn't figure out what it was. And I'm staring at this poster, and suddenly the figure and the ground separate. And I can see the figure is saying, you know, Grateful Dead, Fillmore Theater, you know, August 9th, tickets $15, whatever it was, you know, it was saying. And it's written there, but the figure had to separate from the ground. And everything else became just background. And I'm reading this. And after that happens, you can't see it any other way. You can't go back to the confusion that you had initially. Now, every time I look at the poster, I can read it. And I am reading it. Can't stop it. This is what happens with us. The figure separates from the ground. This is the first skandha. It's the birth of form, it's called. It's also the birth of ignorance, the fundamental ignorance. In Buddhism, ignorance is the fundamental problem. It's called error, chulpa in Tibetan. And what the error is, what the ignorance is that we focus on the figure and we ignore the ground. Ignorance, ignoring. We see that figure, we ignore the background. And in that way, we create worlds, we create lives, who we are, what everything is, that are very idiosyncratic, peculiar to this particular person who has separated the figure and the ground in this particular way. I mean, you and I could be standing next to each other, watching a street scene here in New York. And then if we turned to face each other and tell each other what we'd seen, the reports would be wildly different, because each of us would have been seeing different figures and ignoring everything else. I might have seen somebody who reminded me of my angry mother, you know, and so the person sitting next to me might have seen someone who reminded them of their kind father. And so it goes. It's the way we move through life, seeing these very idiosyncratic views of figure and ground. This is the birth of ego. Now, what happened was, I'm going back to, this is Atman, the sense of self, this heavy that we carry around. I was going to say, it'll come back to me. Oh, I was just going to tell you why we call it ego. What happened was, Freud, developed all this, the idea of this ego. At least when you read English translations of Freud, that's where you first encounter this word ego in any way other than if you were reading Latin, and when you're in your high school Latin course, because ego means I in Latin. Freud never used the word ego. He used the word ich, I, in German. And id, ego and id, that's the it, the other. He never used id, he called it the S, which means it in German. But what happened was that when he died, there was a translator selected, James Strachey, an Englishman. And it was decreed that he was the only translator. All of Freud's works was copyrighted. And the only one who could translate them, allowed to translate them, was Strachey. Strachey was an interesting character. His brother, Lytton, was a member of the Bloomsbury group with Virginia Woolf and other great literary figures. And James did the official and only legal translations of Freud, but he felt that he had to make Freud palatable to the Western medical establishment because they wanted to get psychoanalysis established and accepted as a therapeutic activity, medical activity. And so what he did was he loaded up Freud's thought with Latin and Greek, and you get ego and id and catharsis, cathexis, and all these Latin and Greek terms to make it sound more medical. Well, when Trungpa Rinpoche came here in 1970 and began to translate the Tibetan Buddhist teachings into English and into American, he found, this has happened wherever Buddhism has gone. It's looked for a congenial translator. When Buddhism went to China, it found Taoism as the cultural, linguistic way to translate the ideas into a form that was understandable to Chinese culture. When it went to Japan, it found the samurai and Bushido code and a lot of the Japanese culture. Then it used that. Trungpa Rinpoche looked at American culture and he found Western psychology. He felt that this was the proper translator for Tibetan Buddhist thought into English. And he literally coined the term. You see, the big teaching in Tibetan, in Buddhism, is that the ego does not exist. It's a fiction. The term for that is Atman. Means a negative, Atman means soul. Anatma is the term in Sanskrit. And it means no ego, no soul, no soul. He translated that as egolessness. And the last time I looked at the OED, if you look up egolessness, it actually gave Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche credit for coining the word in the Oxford English Dictionary. Yeah, I thought that was very cool. So here we've got this space, you see, in the middle of this space, and suddenly, magically, there's this problem. There's this separation of a figure and a ground. And what happens is that everything else, other than the figure, becomes secondary. And what ignorance is that we're ignoring the ground. I once saw Trungpa Rinpoche gave a talk to the University of Colorado students, a bunch of CU undergrads. He was teaching a course there. He'd been invited by the chairman of the religious studies department. And I and a friend were assisting Rinpoche. And he went up to the board and he took a piece of chalk and he drew a stick figure of a bird. And he turned around to these audience of sleepy undergrads and he said, "What is this a picture of?" Nobody wanted to answer. It was obvious. So finally one kid says, "It's a picture of the bird." Rinpoche says, "It's a picture of the sky." That's the difference right there. It's the ground. You see the bird and the background it's the sky with a bird in it. We ignore the sky and we focus on the figure. Once you do that, then it implies that thing there, it seems to have true existence of some sort, because everything else is unimportant, implies a perceiver here. That's there, therefore this is here, seeing it. And there is an actual motion, you might say, a sort of a dynamic of tension, of cognition that goes from that to this. That dynamic is fraught with anxiety because it's about to disappear. It's a motion, just like this hand gesture. And everything that moves like this has a beginning and an end. And that thing has this here, that motion, that implication. And so what happens is that the I, which is only an implication, it doesn't actually exist. It's implied. If that's there, therefore I'm here. You might say it's an induction or a deduction or something like that. Then you say, well, if I'm here, I want to reach out and what's that thing out there? Is it good for me or bad for me? And you reach out and you take a look at it and you touch it. That's called the second skandha, which is called feeling. Once that figure is there, then it implies an I, a perceiver of it, in a very primitive way. And you want to know, is that thing for me out there? Is it going to keep up this sense of I? Is it against me? Is it going to attack it? Or is it indifferent? These are called the three poisons, and they're the three fundamental feelings. And they only exist between I and other. Is the other inimical, helpful, or indifferent? And these are called hatred, passion, and indifference or ignorance. It's usually translated as ignorance, but that's a bad translation in English. The term is moha in Sanskrit, which is very different than the word ignorance in Sanskrit. The word ignorance, and you might be interested in Sanskrit, is avidya, which means not seeing. Not seeing what? Not seeing the ground. When you don't see the ground, you're trapped in this I-other duality relationship. And the thing is, because it's only a momentary creation, it's dying as it appears, just like these words. And so it has a built-in anxiety to it that it's going to die, which it is. It's dying as it appears. And so what you want to do is you want to keep the thing going back and forth and back and forth. So if that's there, therefore I'm here, I reach out to feel, what is the quality of that? Is it for me, against me, or indifferent? That information comes back. And then we get the third skandha, which is, it's called impulse. The term is samjna in Sanskrit. Doesn't matter, you don't care about the Sanskrit, but it means impulse. And what it is if that thing is against me, then I've got the relationship is I want to push it away. This is still relationship. How many people do you hate and you want to attack them? And the attack is ongoing, because they still hang around. If only they get further away, but you still want to do that. Or if the thing is for me, if it's going to augment my existence, we think, keep the relationship alive, then we want to pull it towards us, consume it, eat it. That's like making love to it, having sex, falling in love, because it's going to be good for my ongoing existence. And if it's indifferent, if it's neutral, then we don't care. We just stay the same distance. This is the third skandha. It's called impulse. And there's an energy now in this third skandha, the energy of push-pull that we bring to our relationships in the world. And babies are really born at this level. When an infant is born, they come out at the level of the third skandha. It's all impulse, push, pull. They're hungry, they cry. They're in pain, they cry. They're happy, they gurgle. The babies. And then as they grow up, they begin to become a little more intelligent. Their intellect develops. And the example I always use is my first child, who's now 46. When she was about 2 or 3, I don't know, 2, she was beginning to, what time when begin to speak? Around a little before 2, I think. She was toddling. She wandered into the kitchen and she put her hand on the stove and it was hot and she got burned and she cried. And her mother pointed at the stove and said, hot, hot. Ever after, when Kara went into the kitchen, whether the stove was on or off, it didn't matter. She'd point at it and she'd look at somebody and she'd say, hot, hot. She had learned a way to categorize her experience to protect herself. This is what language is for, at least from ego's point of view, from the point of view of this neurotic structure. And we build up very sophisticated, complex intellectual structures with which to keep ourselves philosophical, religious, ideological of all kinds. And they keep us safe. They are stories, these structures. And this is the fourth skandha. It's called Samskara, which means karmic accumulation, because here's the thing about these stories, is that they hang around and they repeat, even when they're not appropriate. They come out. Somebody hurt you, say a parent, and you had a difficult childhood, angry parent. Much later, they're dead. But you see somebody on the street who reminds you of that parent, and it brings up those feelings that you had towards the parent. Might be anger, hurt, whatever. And then something throws you together with that person, and you actually have a conversation, and you realize they're nothing like your angry parent. You just had that reaction. This is the action of karma. As it comes out of the alaya, the storehouse, it's triggered by events in our lives, or it just pops out, as in dreams. And it colors the way in which we see the world and how we react. This is all fourth skandha. Samskara, it's called. We build complex structures built out of ideation with which to try and protect ourselves and order our lives in this world. And they're actually very, very arbitrary and fictional. Partially true, but when something's partially true, only partially true, guess what? It's not true. It's a fiction. And any fiction might have relevance in one situation and lack it altogether in another. Then what begins to happen in the development of the child as they grow up, and you can watch kids as they begin to develop their intellectual capacities. And then what happens is that everything begins to become confused, mushed together. The energy of the third skandha, the push-pull, with the conceptualization of the fourth skandha. And this produces the fifth skandha, which is altogether the ultimate last creation, last stage of the development of ego. And what this is the mixture of the energy of the third with the stories of the fourth, and you get the emotions. I love that person because they've got blue eyes and blonde hair. I love this, I'm angry at this person because they said mean words to me. And we've got these conceptual storylines which carry emotion. Somebody pulls out in front of you and you get utterly frightened and then angry, that this person in a car, let's say, and you develop this story, that crazy son of a bitch, they're not paying any attention and they almost got us killed and yeah. We mix the stories with the emotions. And this is the fifth skandha, called vijnana, or consciousness. I want to see what he says. He has some terrific insights about some of these things. He says, you see these intellectual creations of the fourth skandha are like, and we keep them, our philosophies, our religions, our little interpretations, our aesthetics, our likes, our dislikes. They're like the army of ego. We keep them around us, our soldiers. And we try to maintain ourselves and hold on to our ego with subconscious gossip of all kinds. That's the problem about ego. This story is that it disappears moment to moment. So how do we keep it alive? By talking to ourselves, continually. That's why as we walk down the street, we're continually having this conversation, subconscious or conscious. It's keeping that whole game of I and other going. Because for no reason really, except that once it's going, it has an inherent inertia. It doesn't want to stop. It does stop because it's an action. So there are continual gaps. And that often is what gets us to the path of meditation or Buddhism or some kind of work on ourselves, because we have these flashes of realizing that the stories that we've been involved with are not true. We see gaps in between. Sometimes they can come to you in all different kinds of ways, and I've heard so many different versions of this. But every thought has a beginning and an end, just like these words. And in the absence, in the middle, at the end, there's silence until the next one appears. So meditation is the process of undoing this. And we undo it by starting at the level of the fifth skandha and beginning to see our thoughts. And the thing is this, that you see, there's really only two modalities for being in thought. Either you're lost in the thought, like you're having a dream, just like at night when you're in a dream and you don't even know it, right? You're just dreaming. You're walking down the street, you were on your way to Starbucks, but you got lost in a dream about the rent and you walked right by Starbucks. We're dreaming. That's one modality. The second modality is suddenly you wake up, a horn goes off on the street and you realize, oh, I've been lost in a dream. And you can see the dream for a split second. That's seeing the thought. At that point, you have an option. You can go back into the thought, or you can rest in the awareness, the gap between the thought. Most of us go right back into that thought or another one like it, a chain of thoughts. So what meditation is we begin to nourish the gap, you might say, to become aware of the gap between thoughts. And the way we do it is by start out, we work with an object of awareness, like the breath. The first stage of meditation is called Schemata. It means abiding in peace, but that's not really what it's about. That's a secondary effect, abiding in peace. You see, when we're lost in our thoughts, they're very anxious. Thought is full of anxiety. It's all about me and other and my survival, keeping the game going, my well-being. That's what thought is. So it's full of fear and anxiety. So when we begin to let go of thought, we begin to get some peace. And that's one of the there are three main aspects of beginning meditation. One is that you begin to realize how much time you are spending lost in thought. It's just huge. And in doing that, you begin to get some peace. You work with an object of awareness like the breath or something else. It could be mantra. You know, there are many ways to do shamatha practice. You can do it just by focusing on a glass that's sitting on the table in front of you. And you focus your awareness one-pointedly on this object in the present moment. And in doing that, you lose the anxiety of thought. So you get a rest by coming back into awareness. So the first benefit of shamatha meditation is, one, you become aware of the extent to which one is lost in dreams, because most people aren't. Most people think it's completely normal just to be continually thinking about the rent, their enemies, their lovers, what their vacation's going to be. You know, what am I going to wear today? How do I like this? Do I don't like it? What's am I going to eat for dinner? And we're thinking. And after a while, when you begin to practice shamatha, the first benefit is to become aware of how much of our lives are spent thinking. Not aware, but lost in thought, semi-aware. The second benefit is that in coming back from thought to an object of awareness like the breath, and the breath only happens in the present moment. You feel it coming out your nostrils. That sensation is only happening now. And it brings you out of thought, and you get a rest. That's the second benefit. One teacher I was listening to some months ago said, it's like having a really good nap. Because he was downplaying shamatha. A lot of people think shamatha, focusing your mind one pointedly on an object, is meditation. And he was saying, that's not meditation. We'll come to that in a minute. The third benefit of shamatha is that you begin to learn how to focus your mind, to direct it, instead of having it just jump willy-nilly from one thing to the next. How to focus your awareness, which is what shamatha is all about. But really, what meditation is beyond that is what's called vipassana, or vipassana is the big word that's around today, which is usually translated as awareness or insight meditation. And this is the meditation practice that will take you all the way to understanding the non-existence of ego and the understanding of what is truly real and isn't. And the way that works is this awareness practice. We sort of did it tonight in the meditation. It's awareness of space, the space that we're in. And you just rest here. You have to learn how to do this, and it has to be taught initially, and then it becomes natural. Because the thing is, this space and our awareness are already here. They are what's real. What's not real are the fictions of thought. Let's see what else there is here. There's a lot more in the readings you could get from Trungpa Rinpoche. I'll tell you, when I first met him, I was listening to him speak about this subject, and on the theme that ego is just a fiction, doesn't really have any true existence, sense of I, this thing we call I. And in fact, this thing we call I is the source of all our suffering. We carry it around with us. We're constantly protecting it, worrying about it, feeling depressed when we feel things aren't going well for I, temporarily elated when we think they are, but even when they are going well and we're elated, there's that suspicion in the background, this isn't going to last, which is true. Doesn't, nothing lasts. So we begin to come to this path of meditation, and he was giving this talk about it. And at the end of the talk, during the Q&A, I raised my hand and I said, well, sort of, don't we need the I, at least provisionally, sort of temporarily, so that we can pay the rent and, handle the practicalities of life? And he leaned forward in his chair and looked at me like this, with his eyes bulging in his head. And he bellowed, "Ego is a lie." He wasn't calling it a fiction. It was too polite, because it's so pernicious and it's so unnecessary, and it is not the real. And we wander around thinking it must be extraordinary to penetrate this veil of ignorance and confusion and become a Buddha. But from the point of view of the Buddhas, we're the ones who are extraordinary. We're the ones who have gotten lost in a dream. And a dream of I and other and everything that attends it. So that's the talk for tonight. If you like, we could have a discussion. I really recommend doing the readings. They're pretty good. I mean, I've been thinking about these ideas for 50 years, and it just sinks in more and more. It takes a long time for some of us. Old dogs, slow learners. So anybody?
John? Charles, yeah. I just, something dawned on me when you were talking about this. Now, you said the Sanskrit word Atman, was it Atman?
Yeah, Atman.
Yeah, no. I have studied some Thai, and the Thai word that monks use for I is Atma. I'll bet you anything, it comes from that.
I'm sure. I mean, a lot of, if you study Southeast Asian Buddhism, it comes from the Ceylonese, because what happened was that after the Buddha died, the Sangha fractured. And they were divided into what was called the period of the 18 schools. One of those schools was called the School of the Elders. And in Sanskrit, that's Slavira Vada. Vada means doctrine, Slavira means elder. It's the doctrine of the elders. That school's doctrines went south into Ceylon. Translated into Ceylonese, it's Theravada. So the Theravada Buddhist teachings of Southeast Asia, which are all through Asia, and the languages are related. A lot of the languages in Southeast Asia. So what you're talking about, it makes complete sense.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there are lots of Sanskrit words in Thai.
I wouldn't doubt it.
No.
Yeah, if you're a Thai citizen and male, I think it's by law, I'm not sure, that you will be a monk for some period of time, some 3 months or 9 months or whatever in your life before you go on to other things. Deeply Buddhist.
To be a monk?
Well, I mean, to be in the Thai culture.
Yeah, it's not law, but it is customary.
Because it's customary.
And most commonly, it's when a parent dies. But also some, especially poorer Thai families, send their sons to the monastery for school, but they become monks then. And then when at some point, they leave.
Right.
So,
yeah. Atman.
Fascinating.
It is. Thank you. There's a good chapter on this in Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, as well as the readings in the syllabus you got.
No.
The very first seminars that Trungpa Rinpoche gave in this country, I think the very first one was called The Battle of Ego. And it was all about the five skandhas and how ignorance and confusion arise and proliferate into this complex neurotic form.
I have a question. Yeah, so I think, common challenge is it's well and good to be able to sit in your private space and have the silence and the environment in which you can sit and start to focus or defocus. But then when you're out in the day-to-day and you're being bombarded by stimuli, by things that are prompting you to think, to react, to I would say also, you know, prompting impulses, right? And then creating concepts and making, are we just inevitably built to make life harder than it needs to be? And what are some, you know, some techniques that you've acquired or seen over the years when, you know, in the current environment, for example, or just running a business or, you know, dealing with life, when you're kind of out in the field, so to speak, and unprotected by your own personal space? I'm just kind of curious on, you know, when you're in the middle of it.
It's entirely possible to be awake and to be handling all the complexities of life at the same time. This is the whole point of learning Vipassana meditation, or Vipassana. Vipassana is the Theravada Pali word, and it means superior seeing. And Vipassana is simply, you see, just to get, this isn't a fairy tale, but it begins to sound like it, that our fundamental nature of who we are is this open, spacious awareness. It's called a variety of different things in the upper teachings, the higher teachings. In the Tibetan teachings, one of the big words is Rigpa, which is actually a translation of vidya. Remember I said that the term for ignorance is avidya, not seeing. Vidya, Rigpa, it means this space that we're in. It's not an I-other proposition. There's no I who has to perceive it. That's an add-on. That's a second thought. You know, the first reality is that all of this space that we're in, this room, this time, spatial and temporal, is indivisible with knowingness. They are one. The knowingness is built in. This is the true ground. When they talk about the ground, the ground is kunji, the all ground in Tibetan. The all ground is this space in which appearances arise and pass away. It's lit by knowingness. It's where it's the womb and it's the graveyard, because everything arises from it and passes into it and disappears. And when I say it disappears, I'm not talking about the fact that this glass will disintegrate someday and just become a bunch of molecules, or this body will wind up ashes. I'm talking about the fact that as you turn your head, the world changes. As these words come out, there's sound and there's silence. In the moment, which is the only time we ever have, everything is constantly arising and dying, being born and dying. And this is the description. This is what Vipassana begins to, your awareness, this is what Vipassana meditation means. It's to abide, to come back to this open awareness, which is the simplest thing. What obscures it? Effort. What else obscures it? Self-doubt. These are all attempts to keep the I-other game going. And they're unnecessary, because this fundamental ground of what we are is happening irregardless. That isn't even a word, excuse me. Regardless. I hear my English teacher. It's all willy-nilly, happening, arising. So what Vipassana meditation is at its best is coming back to this awareness effortlessly. The highest teachings, Dzogchen, the great perfection, they talk about this effortless awareness. Vipassana is the same thing. It's just, it changes its name as it goes up. What happens is that the world begins to change as you begin to recognize how to see it properly. And as the world changes, the name of the meditation changes. You're not doing anything different. You're just resting in awareness more and more. And as you do that, the understanding of what I and other are and what all of this stuff is transformed. And this is the Buddhist path. And when you hear about the teachings of Shunyata, for instance, emptiness, that's the first major transformation of the world, of the understanding. But there are ones beyond it, Mahamudra, Dzogchen, and others. And they talk about Dzogchen. The practice in Dzogchen, the great perfection, is just pure Vipassana, to rest in this awareness. They call it, get this, the lazy person's path to awakening. Why? Because there are other techniques that you can do that require a lot of effort, but this one requires the complete abandonment of effort. Sometimes they say, there's a chant, I can't think of it, but again and again it's emphasized that this open awareness that we all have, we can come back to it. This is how you practice meditation in action in your daily life. Is you're walking along, you're thinking, a horn goes off, you come back. I used to joke about having the words "come back" tattooed on my knuckles, so that I'd see them and I go, oh yeah. In fact, we used to do that. We used to write little slogans on our hands. Me and my fellow students, there's a phrase that we used to write that was meant to wake us up, but after a while you begin to stop seeing it, I remember doing things like going to the office supply store and getting these orange circular stickers. Oranges are the Tibetan Kagyu colors. If you're a monk, you wear orange robes. So I'd take these stickers and I put them on my coffee mug at the office, on my cigarette lighter, on this gear shift of my car to try and get me to remember to come back. Come back to what? To this awareness. Beverly.
Yeah. If you're an artist and you're creatively thinking of perceptions and form and color, you don't really want to come back. You want to go deeper into free associating and having these percepts become lively. You don't want to come back. In fact, you want to not come back.
You don't want to come back to thought.
You don't want to be thinking. You want to free associate to perceptions and images. And you don't want to come back to any thought at all.
Exactly. But I'm talking about coming back to awareness of the free associations. You see, I said there were two modalities for thought. One is that you're lost in the thought. The other is you realize you're thinking. Now we can, in our meditation, be aware of our thoughts arising and passing, just like a movie presentation, without holding on to them. We can do it with this present moment now. And as an artist, you can watch the whole train of associations flowing out of your brush, or whatever it might be. And if you get lost in a thought, in a conceptualization, what happens? The art becomes conceptual. This is why, especially in the East, the art of, the calligraphy and Chinese painting, it's all in the moment. It's in the moment is so emphasized to give up conceptualization.
That's very true.
Flower arranging, ikebana.
It's in the moment.
Yes, and it involves tremendous relaxation and pleasure.
Yeah. I think the actual being in the moment is that you can't enjoy life unless you're in the moment. I mean, you have to be in the moment to know what's going on. Otherwise, you're missing your life if you're in thought. So for that reason, Vipassana meditation is so useful because it keeps you in the moment. But when you're being creative, it's a different modality. It really is a different modality because you're not in a thought process. You're more in an image process that are in thoughts. It's like it's dreaming. It's a dream state. It's the pre-conscious.
But you're aware of it.
Sometimes you just just flow with it. And it's such a beautiful place to be. You don't want to come back to thoughts.
Okay.
Well, it's not that you would be coming back to thoughts. You would be coming back to the space within which you could be aware of the play of images. So I actually think that that play of images and associations is a species of what John is calling thought. And I understand that it's categorically different because it's non-conceptual. But I think it still carries a kind of risk of keeping one distant from being able to rest in the space of awareness. And so I think what John is also saying, and please adjust me as I go, is that it's possible to be aware and also enjoy that play of images and color and all of that. But one can enjoy that artistic sort of play at the same time as being aware of it. It sounds unlikely because the being aware of it sounds like you're standing apart from it, but I think it's actually possible to enjoy it on both levels, that you can enjoy the play itself, but also enjoy the witnessing of it.
But when you're in it, you don't analyze it. You just let yourself.
Yeah, there's no analysis. I'm not talking about analysis either.
Yeah, I think you're both saying the same thing. It sounds
Yes.
very similar to being really, really in touch with, absorbed in
Exactly.
the arising of the phenomena as it appears on the canvas or wherever your art is being created. Trungpa Rinpoche had an expression. You know, he was an artist. He painted all the time, and he was a master flower arranging. Had a degree in it that he got in Oxford before he ever came to this country from a master Ikebana person. And he also was a poet. And he talked a lot about art. And with Allen Ginsberg, he developed the slogan, which I've been thinking about for years: first thought, best thought. And I think what he's talking about is what you're talking about, Beverly, and you, Karen. You know, that there's that moment when it just appears and you see it. And a second thought is not good.
That is good. Right.
I think I'd like to shift what I'm saying into a kind of question, which is about absorption. And to stick with that example of being absorbed in what's coming out on the canvas as it's coming out. How does that square with what you're saying about awareness? Like, is the awareness at that point an absorption activity, or is it a witnessing activity, which is being a little bit of a watcher of the absorption?
Yeah, you don't want to, being a watcher is not good,
No good.
because the watcher inevitably screws things up. It inevitably makes your hands start
Questioning.
stuttering.
Right. But when
What we're talking about is complete, utter confidence beyond any statement of confidence. It's knowing that you can do this, that there's no doubt, doubtless confidence. And that's a big term in Tantric Buddhism. The word for it is ziji. And what it means is unconditional confidence. If you're telling yourself, I can do this, that's not confidence. It's just completely there doing it. Ziji. This is huge in Tantrism and in the Shambhala teachings. It's very, very important. They begin with it.
I have a question. Is there, so if you talk about, for example, being in the creative flow, where it is are there two ways, for example, in what we're talking about right now, of being in the present? One is to be in the creative flow, totally confident. The other would be to notice that you're in the creative flow, to notice, even if it's briefly, that you're in the present moment. Are they both not, I mean, it's possible to alternate between those, correct?
That would be at the stage of being on the path rather than having arrived at the goal. At the goal, there's no questioning, no stepping out. You can't step out because in fact, we're always in it. But on the path, there's a constant looking back where you see things in the rear view mirror, as it were. You say, oh yeah, that was a great moment back then. I want to recapture that. And then at some point, it is recaptured and you actually have another great moment. And then there's again this feeling of, oh, that was good, I did something. And as soon as you say that, it's gone. That moment of spontaneity is gone, you know? So that's the quality of being a student on the path, is constantly looking back in the rearview mirror until it burns up that feeling of wanting to get somewhere. That's the fundamental problem of ego. It always wants to get somewhere. It wants to improve. Self-improvement is the credo of ego and of confusion, one way or another. So I was going to say, the second modality of thinking, the first one is you're lost in the dream. The second one is you realize you were thinking. At that point, the great thing, if you can practice this, even for a moment, is not to judge yourself for having had that thought. If you say, darn it, I was thinking again. Well, you're thinking again right there. You know, you're off in another one. And you're being really hard on yourself and trying to improve yourself, and it's ego all over again. You know, and we do that. We do that, don't we? We say, oh, I was thinking, I got to get rid of those thoughts. Your thoughts are not your enemies. You've got to, that's what we have to overcome. And there'll be moments when you can sit there and just watch them rise. The slogan is, they say, just as, Milarepa, the great 11th century yogi saint, he said, when I meditate on the sky, there are going to be clouds. When I see the clouds, they are in the sky. When I meditate on the mountain, there are going to be goats, he says. I love that one, because you got a mountain, you got to have goats on the mountain. When you meditate on the mind, you're going to have thoughts. They come and they go, just like the clouds in the sky and the goats on the mountainside.
You might as well use the thoughts in the path. You might as well just use them in the path.
If you can.
Oh, you are there, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, John, I have a question about what school or where did the phrase, you said that the lazy person's way to awareness?
To enlightenment.
To enlightenment. Okay, it reminded me of a book, and the author was named Thaddeus Golas, called The Lazy Man's Guide to Enlightenment. And relative to this conversation, the one kind of slogan that I remember, the book was about trying to how to deal with a bum trip when you're doing LSD or doing drugs or whatever. It's an old book, but the main slogan that I remember that you can really pull out in a tight spot when you're feeling very reactive to your thoughts, your stories, is two words: no resistance. No resistance. And it seems like what this lady is talking about, it's certainly become part of my creative process in poetry and music. And in other words, if you have a thought, or if you have a thought, maybe it's a negative thought, maybe it's some friction between you and another person, but if you resist it, it just compounds it and doesn't allow it to, manifest its beauty, really. And contribute to the making a thread in the tapestry of whatever's going on in your creative process at the time. No resistance. Can pull it out of your back pocket anytime.
Thank you. Thank you. No
That was
resistance.
helpful. That was really helpful. What
Yeah,
was,
that's from what Graham said. Yeah.
Well, whatever.
So you're a graphic artist, Beverly? Painter? Huh?
abstract artist.
Abstract artist. Okay. We have a lot of artists. We have a morning meditation group. I want to invite you all to come. Some of you do come. There are a bunch of people here who come to this morning meditation, and it's become quite a lovely sangha. The people have become friends. What we do is we meet on the hour, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We meet at 8 a.m. and there's 15 minutes of conversation. And then we practice for an hour to 9:15 with sitting and meditation and walking, and also Tonglen, which is compassion practice. A little bit, about 10 minutes of Tonglen, 10 minutes of walking, and the rest is sitting. And then at quarter after the hour, 9:15, people stay around and they talk, and they become really wonderful friends. It's become like a sangha, very warm, especially during the COVID crisis, because a lot of people are isolated, and so it's terrific. And then on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we meet at 9 instead of 8. 15 minutes of conversation, an hour of practice, and then we end the practice at 10:15. And people usually hang around for about a half an hour sometimes. And yeah, it's lovely. I invite you all to come. If you want to know how to connect to the link, you can go to the New York Buddha Dharma website. It's newyorkbuddhadharma.org. And there's the link to join the morning meditation. So you're all invited.
Isn't it this very Zoom room, John?
The same Zoom room that you're in now. I'm sorry.
It's,
If you came at that time, this link would do exactly what you want.
Is this link? Yes.
It's that same link. That's right.
Yes.
Thank
You
you.
said what time? It was what, 8 o'clock?
It's going to be 8 o'clock Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 9 o'clock Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And you can drop in, you can drop out. I would recommend coming on the hour the first time or two just to meet people, give you more of a feeling of connection. But there are people who come late, leave early, it's fine.
Well, John, I thought of I was going to offer a name for your new group.
Yeah.
Westchester Open Way.
But I
Wow.
want to untie it from a location.
Oh, just the acronym would be WOW.
Huh? Wow, that's great.
The acronym would be WOW.
Wow, that's funny. Thank you, Graham. See what's going to happen is the Westchester Buddhist Center is breaking up. And what I intend to do is to keep these teaching sessions and meditation sessions going on Zoom for anybody who wants to do it.
Can you say about Westchester, what is happening to Westchester Buddhist Center?
It's dissolving, and the Kalinis are going to create their own organization, which may have a physical location if that begins to happen.
So it's not going to be in Irvington anymore?
What?
Not going to be in Irvington anymore?
When things open up and people can get together, it'll be in Irvington at Eileen Fisher.
Oh, the same place.
Same place, but under a new name. It's not going to be the Westchester Buddhist Center. And if things don't open up, it'll continue online with Zoom. I am going to be moving to Colorado, I think. And so I'm just going to do everything on Zoom.
That's great.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I spent 30 years of my life in Colorado, starting in 1970 with Trungpa Rinpoche. And my daughters are there, and I'd like to go back and see them and be with them. But I love these classes. They're just wonderful. They're inspiring. And the meditations, especially the meditation.
We'll follow you wherever you go.
Ah, I'll follow you, Amelia.
Colorado, anywhere, you know.
Oh, that's
I
really,
mean, it's all the Akash now, right? It's all like cyberspace.
but how will we know where you are, John? How could we follow you?
Google him.
You may not
That's
know,
how I found him.
and it won't matter.
How would we know where you are?
By clicking that link, we'll all be here.
Boom.
Yeah, New York with a Dharma.
Oh, you'll always be back into this place? Oh, that's fabulous. The same link we used to get in.
Yes,
Yes.
unless we need another one, but I don't see why we should. It's possible if we start doing what they do at Westchester Buddhist Center, it's like, I would like to ring in some other teachers, some old dog friends of mine, who I think you'd really enjoy listening to. And then we might get, it's possible we'd have things going at the same time and need 2 Zoom rooms. We have different links, but at the moment it'll all be this same link.
So is the New York and the Westchester combining now on this link? They're all together?
No.
No.
New York Buddha Dharma and Westchester Buddhist Center will be going away as names.
I know, but are they the people I'm referring to? Are they all going to be on this same
Right.
link that you're on now? Is that
Not Westchester Buddhist Center. The people who are involved with that, Jane and Derek Collini, and some people who constellate around them, will be on different links.
different links? Oh,
Right. We're all going to have new websites. I don't know what theirs is going to be called, and I don't know what mine is going to be called, or this one, New York Buddha Dharma. It's going to change, though. And we're going to go from non-geographic names like New York Buddha Dharma. Because frankly, at the morning meditation, we've got a regular who comes every day from Belgium. We've got people who come from France. We've got a regular now from Puerto Vallarta.
Yeah.
We've got people who show up from Ventura, Cleveland, Chicago, Boston. It's really, it's kind of fun.
it's a United Nations.
It's becoming that way of meditation.
Mhm.
Great inspiration.
It's great.
So
So
anybody
good.
some comments? This stuff about the 5 skandhas, this is real core.
It's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, but Buddhism is endless.
That's why we're fortunate to have beginningless time, because we need every moment of it.
Yeah, really,
Yes.
really. I think it's because Buddhism doesn't involve any beliefs. So there's no dogma, no credo. And so what has happened is that over the centuries, enlightened people have found new ways to say it. And all those ways are legitimate, and we study them.
Right. What I got was, we are actually here. We've already made it. We can rest in the reality of impermanence. No time required.
Thank you. Well said. Well said. Okay, well, should we end, or is there anybody else? I love hearing your comments. Beverly, I'd like to, maybe at another time, I'd love to know how we know each other from Lou Ormond.
Well, you did groups with him,
Yeah?
and I did a lot of groups in Boston. You did it in New York, and I was in Boston doing lots of group psychotherapy.
Were you in group, or were you leading group?
I was running groups.
You were running groups, so was I.
Yeah, you would do it with Lou Ormond, and I did it with my husband, Larry Bader.
Of course, now I know. I knew Larry Bader.
Yes, you knew Larry, yeah.
Right. Beverly and I were part of a community that formed around a wonderful human being named Lou Ormond. I met Lou when we started Naropa Institute, now Naropa University, in 1974. I was teaching a companion class to Trungpa Rinpoche. It was kind of an apologia, it was giving the doctrinal background to the teachings that he was giving. And there were a lot of people in it. There were about 100 people. And one day after class, this older guy comes up. I'm like 30, 31, 2. This guy had to be in his 50s, bald, and he's scrawny, and he comes up and he waiting to speak to me. There were a bunch of people asking questions after class. And he comes up and he says, this psychoanalysis, this Buddhism, it's psychoanalysis. That sound like Lou?
That sounds like him.
And it was the beginning of one of the deepest friendships of my life. I regard Lou as one of the great mentors that I had in life. He was just, I loved him terribly, you know.
What was so unusual is that he let his patients run groups. He trained them by the patient being aware of being a patient, and then he supervised them to be leaders, and that empowered the patient tremendously and made the patient feel normal. And they knew how to do the group because they were in a group with Lou.
Yeah. I could never be in a group with Lou because we were good friends, and wasn't possible to do both. But I was in group with a lot of other people whom you know.
But he did allow his patients to be leaders.
He did indeed.
He did, and that was very empowering for those people. Some people were questioning it, but I thought it was good because he was very careful. He wouldn't let anything bad happen. He was supervising them.
And he was extraordinarily brilliant.
He was so brilliant. And you would never know it because he laughed a lot, and he was very, very loving and funny, right? So funny.
I always felt about Lou that he had this talent for seeing the best in people and speaking to that.
Yes. And he didn't look for symptomatology, the diagnosis. He looked for the strength, what the person had the strength to do rather than what they couldn't do.
Yeah.
Very lovely man.
Yeah.
His wife was lovely too.
What? Yeah, Joan too.
Yeah, she was lovely.
John, I want to thank you.
Okay.
I want to thank you.
One last thing. If you can make a donation to New York Buddha Dharma, I'm going to use the money to help create the new website, pay the web designer and all that stuff.
And I just wanted to say I was going to work on my ignorance, and I appreciate that.
You're going to work on it. Great, Phil.
Yes.
I'll work on mine too.
The exam is next week. It'll be held down at the.
And if you want if you want the syllabus, email me. I'll send it to you. It has the readings in PDF.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
you,
you,
John.
everybody. Thank you,
You
John.
also say the dedication of merit
Dedication, yes.
here. Anybody who wants to stay long enough for that, take a minute.
Good luck on your move to Colorado.
Thanks.
Not yet, not yet.
I'm sorry, what?
Not yet.
Okay, here we go. Dedication of merit. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samskara, may it be all being. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sensual be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Good night, friends.
Good night.
Hey.
Thank you, everybody.